I respectfully acknowledge the people of the Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations as traditional custodians on whose unceded lands I work, live, and practice. I extend my deepest respects to all Indigenous people across the country and pay my respects to their ancestors and elders past, present, and emerging.
Hi, I'm Anna, and my project is called Etc. So On and So Forth. It is directed towards an understanding and development of a relational design practice based on the plastic roles of author, designer, and reader participant, using the text and context as a driver for designing these situations. This body of work explores how lines of interiors can be drawn in several ways and how it is imperative that the research and explorations remain open to be interrogated and questioned. This allows for a more informed word-making and considered approach to design processes and outcomes. The conceptual underpinning for the project stemmed from research into the notion of text and the mode in which different individuals/groups utilized and understood it. It spanned across theoretical concepts around the role of the author to more spatialized and performative responses of the embodiment and interaction with text as the material. These explorations reframed my thinking of text as something stagnant to text as an adaptive material. The initial stages of the project explored how we are the products of the flows of information, shaping how we read ourselves, others, and the world. We are contingent to the surrounding social systems at play and time frame we exist in, making us junctures in a relational system with constantly shifting boundaries. This was investigated through the notion of text as technology. This was explored in a multitude of ways, where themes of drawing into and from space were investigated and expanded upon, using action and active reading as techniques to do so. It exemplified how text can create tangible outcomes and a dynamic between text and reader arises. Through this process, the action sits simultaneously to the work. It exemplifies how the act of reading is something concrete, demonstrating how text exists in time. It was an iterative process of active reading, showcasing a situational, performative, and personal working through, beginning to touch on the notion of expanded spatial encounter. With the initial stages of the project revolving around all things text, the role of the author was a very poignant theme. It had been an underlying thread, weaving throughout the project like an invisible stitch, giving it structure and shape, but not yet seen. I was influenced by Michel Foucault and the way he not only posed questions around what an author is, but its relevance, functions, and contributions to text. With the author being reanalyzed and reinterpreted within the research, the role of reader could not be dismissed. Within later research, the gaze shifts to the connection between author-reader and the dynamic relationship that arises when interchanging author with designer and reader with participant. By exploring this, it folds the body of work back into a relational practice as it lays the foundations for these relationships to be enacted and examined. This is where the reading group was created. Through reading, meeting, conversation, interpretation, and presentation, etc., so on and so forth, manifests in three distinct modes: the reading group, the reading grounds, and the read in and in between. The aim of these modes is to fortify different levels of engagement with participants, establishing relational platforms that hold potential to disrupt, generate, and disseminate knowledge. These modes of working produce a myriad of responses and open-ended situations. The reading group is a relational reading circle where temporary situations emerge from the interactions between content, context, reader, and author. It is space for ideas I have been grappling with to be enacted. I, myself, am framed as author of this situation. From an individual engagement with the text to a collective reading, the groups generate a multitude of situations from this act of coming together. It builds in complexity as a greater sense of trust is established. A lot of the themes covered relate the content to the context, tying the experience of the group together. It is a world-making act, where we were in the process of both imagining and creating space, where things can unfold. It became prominent that these situations expand outwards of the relational reading circle and into other streams of life, presenting an expanded spatial counter in process. The latest set of reading groups, Read 1, Read 2, and Read 3, look into ideas around text as a generous space, through the laying of annotation and information. As the read progresses, the text begins to be read more as a drawing or abstracted form. I pose the question, is it possible for it to become too generous? This is what the publication, which I will touch on later, is in response to. Moving on to the reading grounds, this is the digital infrastructure of etc. so on and so forth. This manifested in the second half of the year and acts as a resource for the participants and a space for the explorations and temporal situations to be archived, gathered, and distilled. The grounds is an essential tool for the reading group. Later, as we experience an array of unpredictable and constantly changing circumstances, this allows for easy access to the material and the tasks. It is a more formalized space for the interactions to occur, where it is monitored and arranged. It is the grounds for the dissemination of knowledge, where the shared experience of the reading group creates the conditions. It continues to be adaptable to the generative nature of the project, whilst acting like its container. The Read In and In Between is a series of publications that are produced through the interactions the readers have with themselves, the text, and the world around them. It is a publication that lives online, open to be edited, viewed, and interpreted. The aim of this is to unfold the text now in a new form back into the public realm for it to be reinterpreted, reread, and reanalyzed. It is an amalgamated space of everyone's ideas and encounters, a conversation that is still occurring, just in a different mode and format. It is a primary example of the intersection of content and context playing out within the project. I'd just like to note that all the publications were held in the context of lockdown, and I'll just be quickly talking through each volume. So Volume 1, From the World, was held in the context of the daily walk. My intent as author of the situation was to have no predetermined outcome, but aid participants in embodying the text and heightening their awareness of their surrounding environment. It became an embodiment exercise, exploring the confluence of rhythms between body, urban environment, and activity. Volume 2, From My Window, shifted the reader from this idea of embodiment of the rhythms to the observation of rhythms. Still confined by restrictions, it became about noticing. It played on this idea of the seemingly still nature of observation, when in fact it is quite an active and stimulating act, noticing the cyclic rhythms that are always transferring and transmuting around. Volume 3, From One to Another, is an experimental process of my research where I, as author, test out how readers respond to text moving from a generous read to an abstracted form, and how that is read and responded to. With the participants rereading this text for the third time, you see how they are incorporating an embodied and observational way of responding. Reflecting on this year and etc. so on and so forth, I examine the myriad of situations it has produced, from the individual at home reading the text, to the coming together of the reading group, to then them engaging with the built environment with select instructions. The range of personal, collective, and urban situations contribute to this understanding of an expanded interior practice. It has been through the engagement with my peers and the specific community that these situations have formed. At the end of my abstract, I state how critical reflection and analysis of text as an adaptive material and condition has the capacity to shape the way we think, act, and design, which in turn can create a more informed world making. The term world making, coined by Leslie Kern, has been the underlying ethos throughout the duration of this project, and has been a key component when thinking through all the modes of working. I see it as claiming and creating space for potentials to unfold. Imagination and knowledge are immaterial processes but create tangible outcomes. They permeate all aspects of life, and to be able to design and create for an ever-evolving world, there needs to be a sense of trust, togetherness, and openness to do so. Throughout this generative process, there has been no defined outcome, but a constant unfolding of potentials, unable to predict how one will flow into the other. This is simply an example of how, as designers and authors of space, we dictate and influence how it's used, experienced, and read. We need to be aware of our part in the process and the gravity of it, approaching the design process with sensitivity and adaptability. The intention behind this body of work is to initiate and disseminate streams of knowledge from different perspectives, interactions, and situations, informing how world making supports a relational design practice. It reframes the position of the designer and forces a reflective process of the role that we play. Now I'll end on a quote by Keller Easterling. The intent of designing interplay is not to fix positions, but to initiate interactivity, to disrupt loops and binaries. There may be no single new technology or magic bullet, but rather a shift in the relationships between things. There may be no single event, but rather an unfolding gradient of events. The designer is then temporarily manipulating the chemistries of assemblages and networks. Thank you.